At 15, my parents dumped me at my grandparents' farm so their golden daughter could shine. Years later, after I built a life they never expected, they returned demanding support, only to learn my wedding didn't include a single seat for them. Hey, Reddit! My family made it clear who the favorite was, and it definitely wasn't me. So I packed up whatever dignity I had left, rebuilt my entire life from the ground up, and stopped waiting for any of them to act like actual parents. Before I get into all that, here's how everything started. I'm Ryan Harper, 30 now, married, settled, and living a life I built with my own hands. But back then, I was the family screw-up. My little sister Madison, Maddie Harper, was the perfect one. My parents, Deb and Gary, acted like she carried the whole family name on her shoulders, and I was just around to make everything harder. Before things fell apart, the person I spent most of my time with wasn't even family. It was Tyler Brooks. He was basically my brother. We'd game until 2 in the morning, ride our bikes all over the neighborhood, try random sports because we were bored, and make stupid plans about renting some tiny apartment one day and fixing it up ourselves. It was the kind of friendship where you just assume the other guy is always going to be around. Then he wasn't. The accident took Tyler and his parents on the same day. There wasn't even a real goodbye. Just phone calls, a couple adults talking in hushed voices, and me standing there trying to convince myself someone misunderstood something. I don't think 15-year-old me had the mental room to accept that someone who'd been over every weekend for years just vanished. After that, everything in my house felt heavier, like the walls got closer. A few days later, my parents insisted on a family dinner to get things back to normal. They said it like normal was even possible. We all sat down. I barely touched my food. My head wasn't in the room. I could still see Tyler's bike leaning against my garage from the last time he came over. While I was sitting there trying not to fall apart, Deb launched into her usual routine about Maddie's accomplishments. "She's just doing so amazing," she said, hand on her chest like she was announcing a miracle. "Her teachers can't stop talking about her potential." Gary nodded along like he was her manager. "She's setting an example. That's what discipline looks like." Then he looked right at me. "Ryan, don't drag the mood down tonight." Maddie leaned back in her chair, smiling like she was on a stage. "Maybe you could try harder too," she said, acting innocent. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She waited for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I tried talking once. Just one sentence about how weird everything felt without Tyler. Deb cut me off immediately. "Ryan, please, we're trying to have a positive dinner." Gary added, "There's a time and place for your emotions." Apparently, that time and place never existed in that house. I felt invisible. Like the only person who noticed Tyler was gone was me. And even that made me an inconvenience. School after that felt pointless. Every hallway had some memory attached. His empty chair in class made me sick. I stopped caring about homework, about group projects, about showing up. I didn't want to talk to anyone, especially teachers who felt obligated to ask if I was managing okay. I wasn't. I wasn't even close. I started hanging around people who didn't expect anything from me. Guys who didn't ask where I was going after school or why I didn't want to go home. We weren't doing anything impressive. Mostly stupid, reckless stuff because it felt better than sitting still long enough to think. Deb responded by going full martyr. "You're destroying this family," she'd say, hands on her forehead like she was fainting. "Do you know what you're putting us through?" Gary gave speeches that sounded like he practiced them in the mirror. "You're choosing the wrong path. A man takes responsibility." He always timed these speeches for when I was already upset, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to twist the knife. And Maddie? She used every mistake I made as fuel. "I don't get how we're related," she said one morning before school. That sentence got her extra praise from Deb. At least one of my kids cares about her future. Everything I did was either wrong or proof that Maddie was better. The final blow happened when me and a couple of the guys were messing around in a parking lot after dark. We were underage and acting stupid. Someone called the cops. When the patrol car rolled up, I knew I was screwed before they even spoke. They took us in. Not a real arrest, just holding us until parents arrived. But that was enough. Deb walked in with tears already flowing. "Ryan, how could you do this to us?" Gary stood stiff, arms crossed, giving me the look of someone about to deliver a closing argument. Maddie wasn't even there, but she made sure everyone knew later how embarrassing it was for her. The ride home felt like hours. Deb switched between crying and blaming me. Gary lectured nonstop. "This is what happens when you refuse to listen," he said, as if I'd ever been given space to say anything at all. The next morning, before I even sat up in bed, they told me I was leaving. No discussion, no, "How are you actually doing?" Nothing. Just, You're going to live with your grandparents until you can get yourself together. Maddie stood behind them with her arms crossed like she was watching the ending of a show she enjoyed. When I got in the car with my bag, I didn't feel scared. I felt erased, like they'd finally admitted what they'd been hinting at for years. Maddie mattered. I didn't. That was the moment things truly cracked. Not when Tyler died. Not when school fell apart. Right there, in that driveway, when my own parents made it clear I wasn't worth keeping around. And my parents dropped me off at my grandparents' place on a cold morning. I was 15, sitting in the back seat with one backpack and the last scraps of my old life. We turned down the long dirt driveway, and I expected judgment waiting for me. Another round of speeches or disappointed stares. Instead, Grandpa walked out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, calm as ever. Grandma came out from the porch, already smiling like I was someone she'd been missing, not the kid my parents had just kicked out. Grandpa walked right up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're home now. No anger, no questions." Grandma hugged me. "Come inside, sweetheart. You look worn out." Behind me, Deb barely stepped out of the car. She stood with her hand on the door like she might faint. Gary looked proud of himself, like he'd solved a problem. "Don't make them regret this," he said. That was his goodbye. Nobody answered him. Grandma didn't even look at them. They drove off, dust rising behind the car until it disappeared. That evening, I met Uncle Scott, Gary's brother. Technically, I'd met him when I was a little kid, but the memories were fuzzy. Just a couple birthday parties and one cookout I barely remembered. He'd moved out here long ago to help Grandpa and Grandma run the farm. My parents never talked about him much, so seeing him again felt like meeting someone new. He walked in from the far side of the yard, carrying 2 heavy feed bags. He wasn't loud or dramatic, just steady. He set the bags down, nodded at me, and said, "You're Ryan, right? You were tiny the last time I saw you." I nodded, and he held out his hand. "I'm Scott, your uncle." Then he said the 3 things that set the tone for everything that came after. "You're safe here. You gotta rebuild yourself. I'm not giving up on you, but you can't wreck this house." He didn't raise his voice or stare me down, just laid it all out like simple instructions. The first few weeks were awkward. Not because of anything they did, because I didn't know how to react to adults who didn't yell or guilt trip me. I waited for a trap that never came. Grandpa woke up early and handled chores like it was nothing. Scott worked right beside him. Grandma kept the house running steadily, always checking if I'd eaten or slept, but never prying. When I messed up something, like latching a gate wrong or dropping wood, Scott didn't sigh or tilt his head like he was disappointed. He'd just fix it, show me fast, and move on. No speeches, no guilt, just correction and routine. Little by little, the house stopped feeling temporary. I did chores in the morning, helped with the animals, and kept up with school. Nobody compared me to Maddie. Nobody talked to me like I was a burden. I didn't trust it at first, but the steadiness worked on me in ways I didn't notice right away. By the time I turned 17, life at the farm had settled into something normal. I finished high school through the local district, did chores before and after classes, and actually passed everything. Not perfectly, but enough to get through without anyone yelling about it. Scott was the one who brought up college. "Community college is 20 minutes away," he said. "You're old enough. You should go. No point sitting around once you're done with school." He didn't say it like a demand, just a direction. Grandpa agreed. Grandma packed me lunch every day before classes started. It was the first time I made a next step without feeling pushed into it or compared to anyone. Community college wasn't big. Couple buildings, cheap cafeteria, quiet hallways. But it felt like a clean start. That's where I met Hope. I noticed her during our first semester, in a crowded lecture room where half the class was half asleep. She took actual notes, asked questions, and didn't seem bothered by anything around her. After class, she held the door open for me and said, "You're in my section, right?" In this plain, friendly tone that didn't make anything awkward. We kept ending up in the same group work, walking out of the same hallways, sharing the same breaks. We didn't jump into dating or anything. It started slow. Small jokes, casual conversations, studying at the same table. No pressure, no weirdness. She talked to me like I wasn't a screw-up or a charity project, just another student. Back at the farm, life kept moving. Grandpa showed me new chores every season. Grandma treated me like I'd always belonged there. Scott stayed steady. Never loud, never dramatic, just there every day, teaching me things without making it feel like a lesson. Those 2 years changed everything. And I didn't fully see it yet, but the farm, Scott, and even the quiet routine had already done more for me than my parents ever tried to. After a few months, I learned how to lift with my legs instead of my back, how to tie knots that didn't fall apart, how to fix a fence panel without breaking the next one over. The weather didn't scare me anymore. I started finishing chores without Scott having to redo them behind me. That felt new, being trusted to not screw everything up. College ran alongside all that. Classes in the morning, farm work in the afternoon, and hope was becoming a regular part of my days. We'd walk to our cars together, compare how awful our professors were, or sit in the library finishing assignments. She didn't ask about my past. She didn't act like she needed to figure me out. She just liked being around me, and that was enough. Life was starting to feel balanced until Gary showed up. One afternoon, I came inside for water and found him standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed like he owned the place. Grandma stayed by the stove, not looking at him, and Grandpa sat at the table with that expression he used when he was minutes from losing patience. Gary looked me up and down. "Good to see you're doing better," he said, like he deserved credit for it. He turned to Grandpa. "I think it's important he understands that this improvement doesn't erase what happened. He needs to earn forgiveness." He said it like he was giving a sermon. He didn't ask how I was doing or what I'd been working on. He just walked in and went straight to the moral lessons. Then, he tried telling Grandpa and Grandma how to handle me. He needs structure, clear rules, consistent discipline. You can't just let him run around. That's how we got here. Grandpa finally put his mug down. "You don't get to tell us how to handle anything," he said. "You dropped him off and drove away. We'll raise him how we see fit." Gary blinked like someone had slapped him. "I'm only saying this for his good," he tried again, slipping into his usual devil's advocate tone. "Somebody needs to hold him accountable." Scott walked into the kitchen right then, and Gary went quiet for a moment. "Well, well, well, look who decided to show up," Scott said, looking at Gary. "Hey," Gary replied. That instantly shifted the room. Gary's jaw tightened. "Fine, do it your way." He glanced at me like I disappointed him by not backing him up. Then he walked out without saying goodbye. I didn't chase after him. I didn't say a word. A few days later, Deb called Grandma. I was walking past the hallway when I heard the start of it. "I miss my boy," she said, her voice soft and shaky. "I think about him every day." It almost sounded real, until Grandma gently suggested she talk to me directly. Deb snapped instantly. "You don't understand what he put us through," she said. "We sacrificed everything, and Maddie suffered more than anyone. You can't imagine how hard it was." Her tone changed so fast it barely made sense. Grandma didn't argue. She just said, "I need to finish dinner," and hung up. I heard enough to know it hadn't changed at all. Deb still made everything about her. Gary still pretended he knew what was best from a distance. And Maddie was still their center of gravity. Instead of bothering me the way it used to, it made something clearer. I wasn't going back there. I didn't want to. Whatever family role I used to hold had been replaced years ago, and trying to get it back didn't make sense anymore. On the farm, I was useful. In school, I was passing. With Scott and Grandpa, I was learning. With Grandma, I was safe. And with Hope, I was starting to feel like someone who had potential, not someone who needed fixing. The more my parents tried to reach into my life with guilt or lectures, the more it pushed me toward the people who stayed consistent. I didn't say any of this out loud, not then, but I felt it. Every day I got up, did my work, and kept putting distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming. And Hope kept showing up. Not dramatic, not trying to fix my problems, just steady. The same way the farm was steady. The same way Scott was steady. For the first time in years, my life wasn't falling apart. It was finally taking shape. By the time winter rolled around, things continued the same. I hadn't heard much from my parents, which made life quieter. But Maddie, even from a distance, still found ways to get under my skin. It started with a message from one of my cousins. Nothing dramatic, just a casual text asking how things were going. Then, out of nowhere, she added, "Maddie's been talking again. Thought you should know before it spreads more." I asked what she meant. The reply came fast. "Maddie says you're freeloading out there, that Grandpa and Grandma are wasting money on you. She keeps saying she's the one carrying the family name now." I sat on the edge of my bed reading it twice. It wasn't surprising that Maddie was still obsessed with attention, but hearing she was dragging my grandparents into it made my jaw clench. They'd done more for me in 2 years than my parents had in 5, and she was trying to twist it into some kind of burden. I showed the message to Uncle Scott. He didn't react much, just sighed and said, "She doesn't know how this house works." Grandpa overheard and grunted something under his breath I didn't catch, but the look he gave Scott said he already suspected something like this was going around. A few days later, the rumor reached the rest of the extended family. It built fast. Someone repeated Maddie's comments at a relative's house, and suddenly people were questioning whether Grandpa and Grandma were enabling me. The more it spread, the worse it sounded. At one point, someone even asked Grandma if she was tired of raising other people's mistakes. Grandma didn't tell me that. My cousin did. By the time the holiday gathering came around, the situation was already tense. I didn't go. The plan was to stay home, finish chores, and avoid dealing with people who barely said 2 words to me until they had an opinion to offer. But Grandpa and Grandma went, and from what I heard later, the whole thing fell apart within an hour. A relative, someone on my dad's side, made a passive comment about kids who don't appreciate what they're given. Grandma ignored it. Then another person said something about how Maddie is doing amazing and representing the Harper name well, followed by a snide, "Shame not everyone does." That was when Grandpa stepped in. Scott told me how it unfolded later. Grandpa put his fork down, looked across the table, and said, "You don't get to talk about my grandson like that when you haven't lifted a finger for him." It wasn't loud, but it was final. The room went silent. Someone tried to defend Maddie, saying she was just concerned, but Grandpa cut them off. "She's stirring trouble, and you're allowing it. Ryan works hard. He earns his keep. If you can't respect him, then you don't respect us either." Afterward, he told Scott that certain people wouldn't be welcome at the farm for a long while. When Grandma got home, she acted like nothing happened, but I could tell she was still upset. She made dinner as usual and asked me about school, never mentioning the argument. She didn't have to. I heard enough from cousins to understand how heated it got. Later that night, Hope came by to drop off a book she'd borrowed from me. She could tell something was off. I didn't plan to talk about it, but she stayed in the doorway and asked, "Rough day?" I nodded. "Family stuff." She didn't ask for details. She didn't try to give advice. She just stepped closer, squeezed my arm gently, and said, "You're doing your best. That counts for something." That night, lying in bed, it finally clicked for me. I had always thought Maddie was just spoiled, annoying, and glued to attention. But this wasn't normal sibling rivalry. This wasn't just favoritism, it was malicious. She wasn't just favored. She was toxic. She wasn't satisfied being the golden child. She needed me to stay the disappointment, so she could keep shining. She wanted a target. And I was done being it. I finished community college at 19. No ceremony, no family cheering, no phone call from Deb or Gary. Grandma hugged me when I brought home the certificate. Grandpa shook my hand once and said, "Good, now keep going." Uncle Scott grilled burgers that night and didn't say much, but I could tell he was proud. That was enough. I found a telemarketing job a couple months later. It wasn't glamorous, but I was quick with people and learned fast. At first, I just called lists and followed scripts. But after a few months, my supervisor started giving me tougher calls. Then she started letting me handle training for new hires. 2 years in, I got promoted to team lead. A year after that, I became a sales manager. The job had weird hours, but it paid steady. I stayed living with Grandpa, Grandma, and Scott because it made sense. Rent wasn't even part of the conversation. Grandpa would have laughed if I tried offering any. So instead, I covered bills where I could, bought groceries, paid for repairs when something broke, and still helped with the farm whenever I got home early enough. Life felt balanced. Work, farm, nights with Hope, all in the same rhythm. Then one spring, right when the farm got busiest, everything hit at once. Scott hurt his back carrying a feed bag wrong. I heard him drop it and curse under his breath, and when I got to him, he was hunched over, holding the side of his waist like someone had stabbed him. He tried to walk it off, but Grandpa told him to sit down before he made it worse. Grandma brought ice packs. The doctor said it was a back strain. Scott needed rest. Real rest. Problem was, spring didn't care. Chores doubled. Animals needed feeding before sunrise. Fences needed patching after storms. Bills didn't stop. And my job wasn't slowing down either. Our department was behind that month, and I was responsible for getting numbers back up. I started waking up 2 hours earlier than usual to get ahead of the farm tasks. I'd run around hauling feed, collecting eggs, checking the barn, and dragging equipment across the yard, then rush inside, grab a quick shower, sit down with my laptop, and start my shift. I'd work through lunch, finish calls, close the laptop, and head right back outside. By the first week, I felt like someone had pulled the batteries out of my body. My chest hurt from running around, my hands shook from exhaustion, and I started falling asleep sitting up at the kitchen table. Grandma told me to slow down, and Grandpa insisted they could manage, even though I saw his joints lock every time he bent. Scott apologized constantly, frustrated he couldn't help, but none of them told me to stop. They knew the work had to be done. One night after a storm, I was out in the mud with a flashlight fixing a broken fence, rain dripping off my hair, fingers numb around the wire. Every muscle screamed, but I kept going. Not because I wanted to, but because this house saved me, and I wasn't letting it fall apart. Hope saw pieces of it. She brought food, helped Grandma, and never pushed me to slow down. She just fit into the rhythm of the place. Halfway through the season, a cousin sent me a voice memo from a family gathering. Someone asked Gary how I was doing, and he sighed like he'd carried the world on his back. Sending him to Mom and Dad's saved his life, he said. We did what good parents do. Hearing him take credit for abandoning me didn't make me sad. It made something harden. Later, when Hope found me fixing a latch, she saw it on my face. She didn't pry. She just held the gate steady and said, "You're doing good work. They're lucky to have you." For the first time in weeks, some of the pressure eased. Scott's back healed. Grandpa said he was proud. Grandma made my favorite dinner, and Hope stayed steady through it all. That spring nearly broke me. But by the end, I understood something important. My life wasn't built on running from who I used to be. It was built on showing up for the people who showed up for me. By the time I was 24, things on the farm were running steady again. Scott's back had healed. Grandma was still keeping the house moving like a well-oiled machine, and Grandpa had started hinting that I should be thinking about my next step. Not moving out, just building a future that wasn't stuck in limbo. One morning, Grandpa slid a folded paper across the table. "Auction coming up," he said. "Small plot, cheap if the right person bids." Scott leaned over my shoulder to look. "Good land," he said. "Not perfect, but you could build something." I knew what they were trying to say without saying it. It was time for me to have something of my own. I spent the next week doing nothing but running numbers. Everything I'd saved from my telemarketing job wasn't much, but it was enough to take a shot. If I won the land, I'd have nothing left in the bank, but I'd have a start. A place that was mine. A real foundation. Grandpa and Scott went with me the day of the auction. Hope came too, standing close, but not inserting herself. She knew how important this was. The crowd wasn't big. A few older farmers, a couple investors, and the owner of the property, a man named Carson. He shook hands with people, looked everyone over like he already had opinions. When the bidding started, I raised my card with full confidence. I knew I'd have to put everything I had into it, but I didn't hesitate. I raised my card again and again until the auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. Hope squeezed my hand so hard I almost forgot to breathe. Walking out of that building with the paperwork felt unreal. Not because I was lucky, but because Grandpa and Scott had backed me without blinking. They believed me when my own parents tried to sabotage it. A few days later, I walked the land for the first time. It wasn't much. Just a few acres of uneven ground, an old fence line, and a long stretch of grass. But it was mine. I spent nights sketching plans for a small house. Nothing fancy. Just enough space to live in without feeling cramped. I didn't even get a week to settle into it before Maddie showed up. I was marking out where a future driveway might go when a loud car came bouncing down the dirt path. 3 girls piled out, all dressed like they were here for a photo shoot. Maddie led the way, sunglasses on, phone already recording. "This place is perfect," she said, spinning in a circle like she owned it. "We're going to get such good pictures." I stepped in front of her. "You need to leave." She blinked like she hadn't heard right. "Relax. It's just photos." "You don't even have a house here yet." "It doesn't matter. This isn't your party spot," she scoffed. "Wow. You're really going to ruin this? You should be grateful anyone even wants to come out here." Her friends laughed. I didn't. "I don't care," I said again. "Get off my land." She stormed back to her car, fake crying loud enough to be heard from the road. By the time she got home, she'd already spun the story. Deb and Gary started blowing up Grandma's phone, acting like I'd attacked Maddie for no reason. A few days later, Gary showed up to check on his parents. He cornered me near the barn. "You need to be more understanding," he said. "She's young. She didn't mean anything by it." "She showed up without permission," I said. "That's it." Gary shook his head. "You can't keep pushing people away. And that land, are you sure you can handle it? Don't embarrass yourself." Before I could respond, Scott stepped out of the barn. "You don't get to dump him here and then act like you raised him," he said. "He's doing more for this family than you ever did." Gary tried his devil's advocate tone. "I'm only trying to help." "No," Scott said. "You're not." Gary didn't stay much longer. That evening, I drove Hope to the land. The sun was low, the sky orange. I didn't have speeches planned. I didn't have a ring from some fancy store. I had her hand in mine and the place where our future might be. I proposed. She said yes. When we told Grandpa, Grandma, and Scott, all 3 reacted the way real families should. Grandma hugged Hope first. Grandpa nodded once like he'd been expecting it. Scott clapped me on the back hard enough to make me stumble. Standing on that land later that night, I made a quiet decision. My future was here, with the people who stayed, with hope, with the life I was building brick by brick, not with the ones who tried to tear it down. Building the house took every spare hour I had. I'd finish my shift for the telemarketing job, close the laptop, and drive straight to the land. Some days I spent hours leveling ground or hauling supplies. Other days I was measuring boards under a flashlight because the sun had already gone down. It was stressful, tiring, and a lot rougher than I expected, but it never felt pointless. Hope came whenever she could, handing me tools, marking boards, bringing food, acting like she'd been part of this life forever. The farm stayed steady during that time until one morning when everything stopped. I woke up to Grandma yelling for us. Grandpa was slumped over at the kitchen table, gripping his chest. He wasn't passed out, but he looked pale and confused. Scott reacted instantly, helping him stand while I grabbed the truck keys. We got him into the passenger seat. Grandma climbed in the back, and Scott stayed behind to call the clinic ahead of us. The drive felt longer than it was. Grandpa didn't say much, just held his chest and took slow breaths. At the clinic, they rushed him inside for tests. The doctor came out later and told us it wasn't a heart attack, but it was close enough to be a warning. Grandpa needed rest. Real rest. No heavy lifting, no long hours, no "I'll be fine" speeches. We brought him home with new medication and instructions. He hated the attention, but followed orders because Grandma stared him down until he agreed. News travels fast in families that pretend they're close. By that afternoon, Grandma's phone started buzzing nonstop. The first call she put on speaker was from Deb. The second she heard Grandma's voice, Deb burst into loud, dramatic crying. "I can't believe this is happening to us," she sobbed. This is horrible." Grandma tried saying Grandpa was okay, but Deb didn't listen. She kept going, talking about how she was stressed, how she couldn't handle bad news, how hard this was for her. Not once did she ask how Grandpa actually felt. Not once did she ask if we needed help. Then Gary got on the call. "Well," he said in his calm, fake voice, "this is why family has to stay united. Someone needs to step up and keep things organized." He didn't ask me how I was doing, or Scott, or Grandma. He acted like he was the one holding everything together, even though he hadn't been part of the farm for a single day. I stood in the doorway listening, feeling that old familiar coldness settle back in. Grandma ended the call before Deb's crying got louder. The next day, Maddie showed up in a shiny car with tinted windows. She jumped out wearing clothes that looked borrowed from a fashion blog, holding her phone like she was filming a reality show. "Oh my God," she said loudly, hugging Grandma dramatically. I rushed over the second I heard. She didn't ask about Grandpa until after she'd updated her status online. Then she turned to me. "Ryan, don't stress Grandma today, okay? She doesn't need your moods." She walked into the house like it was hers, organizing things nobody asked her to touch, telling Grandma which chores she shouldn't worry about anymore, even though she didn't actually do any of them. Later, she walked out to the barn and pointed at Grandpa's truck. "I need this," she said. "My friend wants to shoot some pictures at a rustic location. The truck is perfect." "No," I said. "Grandpa's not well. We need the truck here." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. It's just for a couple hours." "No," I repeated. She reached for the keys on the hook. I stepped in front of her. She immediately flipped into victim mode, raising her voice so Grandma could hear inside. "Wow," she said louder. "You're still the same angry kid. I'm just trying to help, and you're attacking me." Grandma came to the door. "Maddie, put the keys down," she said sternly. Maddie looked stunned that Grandma wasn't on her side. She dropped the keys and stormed out, muttering about how toxic I was. 20 minutes later, Deb called Grandma. She started soft, "I just want peace in this family." Then Gary, "After everything we went through raising Ryan, you're letting him disrespect Maddie?" They were blaming me while pretending to be balanced. Scott finally took the phone. "You don't get to talk about respect," he said. "Not after disappearing when things were hard. Don't call here to stir problems." He hung up before Gary could respond. 3 days later, Deb and Gary showed up in person. They didn't ask how Grandpa was doing. Gary started with, "We're just checking to make sure things are handled correctly." Deb crossed her arms, glaring at me like I was the problem. Maddie climbed out behind them, ready to start something. "You need to calm down around people," she said to me. "Your energy is always so negative." Gary nodded. "Your uncle said you've been stressed. You can't take that out on your sister." He talked like he was the reasonable one in the room. Deb stepped forward. "You should apologize to your sister. She just wanted to borrow a truck." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I didn't bother arguing. "This is Grandpa and Grandma's house," I said. If you're here to help them, help. If you're here for drama, leave. I'm not your project anymore. They all started talking at once. Deb crying, Gary moralizing, Maddie complaining. But I didn't move. I didn't back up. Scott walked out and stood beside me, silent but solid. That was enough. They left, furious. A few months later, the house was maybe halfway done, but it felt right. Hope and I planned a simple ceremony on the farm. Nothing big, just friends, neighbors, and the people who actually mattered. Grandpa walked her down the aisle because her own father lived out of state. Grandma did the flowers. Scott helped set up everything from chairs to lights. We didn't invite Deb, Gary, or Maddie. Not out of revenge, out of peace. They didn't earn a place in that moment. Word spread fast anyway. Deb melted down to relatives, telling everyone she was robbed of her son's wedding. Gary acted like he was some wise parent who'd been betrayed. Maddie tried turning the whole thing into gossip, posting online about fake family loyalty. Grandpa shut it all down. Anyone who tried bringing it up got a quick, they weren't invited for good reason, and that was the end of that. The ceremony was small, warm, and real. Hope looked happy in a way that made everything worth it. When we walked back up the aisle, Grandma wiped her eyes, Grandpa smiled more than I'd seen in years, and Scott clapped me on the back so hard I nearly tripped. That night, Hope and I drove out to our half-built house. The frame was up, the foundation was solid, and the field behind it caught the last bit of sunset. We stood there, tired but steady, knowing exactly who our family actually was. The ones who showed up, stayed, and helped build something real. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.